Hi, my name is Gabby, and today I will be presenting on informal used lead-acid battery recycling, why it's a problem, some non-healthcare professionals I've interviewed, and their approaches for alternatives. This was done in collaboration with Nusara Hussain, Hunter Sun, and Chanel Cito, but this report was solely done by me. To give a quick overview of informal used lead-acid battery or ULAB recycling, most motor vehicles use lead-acid batteries, and ULAB recycling is commonly done in lower to middle income countries to make money. This is because the value of lead is quite high, about $1 per pound, so the desire to recycle is high. Typically, an axe is taken to the battery to break it down and get the lead inside. The acid from the battery is typically dumped on the ground, and the plates are removed and melted down in an open furnace which releases lead dust and lead oxide, which are both toxic. This is commonly done because it doesn't require a lot of background knowledge or a specific skill. Lead is considered a group 2A carcinogen, meaning that there is limited evidence of carcinogenicity to humans, but that there is sufficient evidence in animals. On the right is a graph from the WHO detailing the effects of blood lead levels on children and adults. Some key effects of lead poisoning are that it can affect almost all major organs, like the kidneys, liver, heart, central nervous system, endocrine system, and reproductive system. It mimics calcium, meaning that after long exposure, it will be stored in teeth and bones. In children, lead exposure, even at low levels, are associated with lower IQ scores, lower academic achievements, and behavioral problems. It is also very important to note that lead poisoning effects are not reversible. It is also a major concern for pregnant people, as lead exposure is associated with bleeding, miscarriages, preterm births, stillbirths, and low birth weight. Children, however, are more susceptible to lead poisoning than adults because children absorb 4 to 5 times more lead that enters their body than adults. And behaviorally, children are more predisposed to lead exposure as they can play near lead-contaminated soil. But impoverished children are at the greatest risk of lead poisoning, since they are more likely to live near informal lead-acid battery recycling and smelting operations, more likely to live in areas where knowledge about dangers of lead exposure is lower, and more likely to live in areas where accessing health services to monitor, prevent, or treat risks are lower. The 3 professionals interviewed were all given the same background information. We asked them to watch the 2 YouTube videos, one by Professor Jack Caravanos and the other done by Pure Earth on ULABs, and then they were given background information about the effects of lead poisoning, similar to that presented on the last slide. And at the end of it, they were told that banning ULABs was not an option. My first professional is an elementary school teacher named Junior. His perspective was very in tune with educating parents and their children. He suggested educating ULAB and smelter workers about how to reduce soil contamination, how to avoid touching corrosive and dangerous materials, like wearing special thick gloves and other forms of PPE, like a gas mask, so as to not inhale the lead dust. Teaching parents and expecting mothers about the dangers of prenatal exposure to lead and what lead poisoning can look like in their children. He also suggested if the money were to be made available, sectioning areas in the neighborhood for kids to play in that aren't near any ULABs. And in addition to those interventions, enhanced education should be given to children that experience lead poisoning to try to combat the effects on their cognitive development. Our environmentalist Katie had the suggestion of switching to lithium-ion batteries instead of using lead-acid ones. This, however, would require most of the world to switch to using electric vehicles or using renewable resources. Although in the manufacturing process, lithium-ion batteries produce more carbon emissions than lead-acid batteries, this negative impact is offset within a year or 2 of driving. In preparation for this, similar to Ghana's efforts to recycle lead-acid batteries, they should begin efforts to learn and train workers on how to safely recycle lithium-ion batteries. At Bogobloshi, the scrap metal site in Accra, Ghana, is an e-waste recycling center. Workers were known to operate under toxic environments with little to no protection, leaving them susceptible to respiratory diseases and exposure to lead. Their intervention aimed to promote Abogoploshi as a recycling knowledge center by setting it up to be a facility that protected its workers and minimized exposures to toxic substances. Workers were also trained to use the appropriate machines to disassemble and strip metal wires safely and without burning them. In the meantime, Katie suggested finding confined but well-ventilated areas to break up the lead-acid batteries because they release lead fragments and lead oxide dust, which usually settle into the soil and on people nearby, and training workers to change and clean up before going home to prevent exposure to their families. A facility to recycle plastic is needed, especially in low to middle income countries, where the plastic is usually dumped or burned. Jill, our biologist, started off by saying that the switch to renewable energy is entirely possible. It is just extremely expensive to set up and maintain. So until we were closer to using renewable energy, Jill recommended we started by educating people and businesses about the effects of lead-acid batteries. She also recommended piloting a study where informal ULAB recycling is commonly done and picking volunteers. Then giving them the proper PPE, means of recycling these batteries, and alternatives to lead-acid batteries to try out for a set period of time. Then compare the rates of lead poisoning in these volunteers before and after the trial to also raise awareness on the potential improved health benefits to lead-acid battery alternatives. Through this assignment, I learned that no approach is perfect, and an amalgamation of these interventions would be best, which seems to be most things in public health. Some components of the environmental and biologist approach are not viable to implement at present day, but the teacher's approach only deals with a specific part of the problem. The creation of a model e-waste facility like in Ghana is important because, if done correctly, it can set the standard for other e-waste facilities in low to middle income countries. Here, piloting a program like Jill suggested could be very helpful in showing other cities or even other countries why it is important to fund an e-waste facility that educates, trains, and protects their workers. As Katie suggested, preparing for the switch to renewable resources may take some time, but it would allow people that depend on ULAB recycling for sustenance to not fall behind or lack work. And finally, Junior's approach is done more on the community level and involves educating parents on how to best keep each other and their families safe, as well as funding more educational programs for children with chronic lead exposure. Thank you!